Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here with the Right Life podcast. This is the second episode. And today, last time we talked about the foundations of story, and was really excited about that. We talked about how the foundations of story react and sort of work with our own lives, right? So we talked about the three main pillars of story being character, setting, and premise, and how they interrelate with each other as sort of an overview of how they work in story as well as in our own lives. Now, today we're going to do a bit of a deep dive with one of my most favorite people and uh, one of my most favorite students. He's a great writer by the name of James Krake. He is the author of Faceless, and he's got a new book coming out, Ship of Fools. I believe it's when's the release for Ship of Fools, James?
It's scheduled for August 1st, unless I manage to find some horrible mistake that I need to fix in the book, because I
All
have
right,
my proof copy and I'm thumbing through it again and again.
I
Right
love
now
it.
it's August 1st and pre-orders are live.
That's awesome. All right, so we'll make sure to put a link in the description of the video. I'll make sure to add that in. So, and you'll shoot me that link over because yeah, I think I've read Ship of Fools. I think it's a fantastic book. It's a bit of a sci-fi sort of horror, not in the sense of like supernatural sense, but it's basically about a bunch of people locked in a ship, right? And they're trying to get away, and the person got to keeping it together is a space marine, and he's just doing his best to make it happen. And so it's not easy work. It's not easy work. Um, and so I feel like one of the strengths of your writing, especially in your sci-fi, has been your setting. So yeah, you've been one of my favorite students. He joined Prolific. Everybody, it was about the end of last year. It was right after Thanksgiving, I believe, was when we started phase two. Isn't that right?
I think that's when you gave me access to all of your content. I think
Right,
the live events were around New Year's, if I recall
right,
correctly.
right. Something like that. Because we started doing the workshops, and it was funny because James really flourished. It was we were talking, and I remember he wanted to wait until a whole year before he started releasing because he wanted to make sure his writing was good enough. This is one thing I've always
Well, there
enjoyed.
was more than that.
Well, I've always respected your commitment to the craft, right? And I
Yeah.
think that you really always want to give people the best experience. And I was like, bro, the experience is good enough. So we kind of pushed him to it, and he started seeing that he stacks up really well. And Faceless has been doing well. We have a review that was given by another YouTuber. You've been on several podcasts of it talking about it. And, you've had some sales and people have reviewed it. And everyone who reads what you write loves it, from what I can see, especially in the course.
Yeah.
So
So
super
originally, I was planning to do like a stockpile of manuscripts and go release, all in order rather than having like a 6 month delay between book one and book two, like I accidentally had. Um,
mhm.
Maybe in another universe, I did that, and maybe it did better, maybe it did worse. But Faceless has gotten me a lot of great traction, and I've been able to develop a huge base of beta readers now, which I didn't even consider. So I'm really thankful that you pushed me into publishing it.
Of course, right? Your writing it's too good to hide, too good. It must be shown to the world, right? I really enjoyed it, and I'm super glad like you jumped in the program. I know it was probably weird when we had just met. You're like, who's this random guy talking about writing? But I appreciate that you trusted me,
You had energy.
right? Yeah, man. Yeah, I will. We love this writing stuff. We love the stories, and I'll tell you what, you're a fiend in the writing realm. You get it done. That's one of the things. What's your word count that you write every day?
At least 2,000.
2,000 words every day.
Yeah, that
Chris.
lets me get books out to Amazon as well as a bi-weekly chapter for my web novel.
Right. Oh yeah, tell us a little bit about that. Your web novel.
You mean my web novel that didn't actually take off and I probably need to scrap and start over? That web novel?
I was thinking about Undying Emperor, but
Yeah, that one. Yeah, the problem there was I started that, or I wrote the first chapters a year ago, and
hmm
after joining the course in writing 5 books in the meantime. I'm just
Mhm.
significantly better than I was a year ago. Um,
Mhm.
but I'm still releasing chapters. It's an epic fantasy at the scale of world conquest. One person with one magic power to heal uh, cooperates with a wizard basically and is working his way up the ranks to Napoleon style to take over everything.
That sounds so cool, dude.
I do have a great time writing that story.
Right. I think that's the most important thing, right? Is really enjoying what it is you're putting down. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah, yeah,
feel,
for sure.
yeah, that
People
joy
can
in
tell the
writing.
difference between chapters I had fun writing and chapters where I forced myself to write it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it shows with you because like you can tell like especially like in your setting, like the little things you'll bring up and how you'll act about the characters' reactions. Yeah, you have a very particular style and you can see it shift. I think it's always strong quality, but you can tell when you're having fun for sure. Right? Like all the like sort of the food eating scenes in all your cyberpunk. I can tell like you were just enjoying it. Oh,
I always like writing about food.
yeah, it shows, dude. It shows. I love it. You actually had some really interesting comments about food as well in your when you were talking about setting, right? Because you've always been really good at setting, and that's what you wanted to share with us today, actually, because we were talking about that story pillar. So
Yeah,
talk to us
so
about
thank
how
you for
all that works for
complimenting
you.
my setting work.
Yeah, it's
This has
great.
come up in your workshops and other workshops. It just keeps coming up that setting is apparently my strong suit to the point that people have been asking me questions on how to do it. And
Mhm.
eventually I just said, you know what? I'm going to write an essay on this particular thing. And I'm going to put a lot of thought into it. I'm going to clean it up. I'm going to make the argument as well as I can
Mm.
and have it as a resource. So I'm going to read it over this podcast. I'm also going to have this available on my website shortly after this call, since we're live.
Mm.
Uh,
Absolutely. And
yeah,
like and don't feel free to like you can put it on a thing. Like I'm gonna put this on blast probably like one day from now. Well, not one day, to be honest. It's gonna sit on the stream and then I'm gonna start sharing it and stuff. So people will start interacting with it when my next YouTube video drops heavily, like probably Monday or whatever. So if you got it
okay.
by then, that'd be great.
As long as you get it out before August 1st, and people can go and get their pre-orders, so I can be an Amazon bestseller.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if we got the clout, right? That's what we're working on. So I'll do my best. I'll do my best. So did you want to just start running into the setting essay and just kind of share with us what you got? I'd love to share
Yeah,
it with us.
sure. Just a slight disclaimer: essay is not on world building. This
Mm,
is more on like the small scenes. Like even if you're on or modern day Earth, there's a difference between she walked into the restaurant and walking into a Thai fusion joint that happens to have anime on the walls or something, and it smells like burning oil because they just had a fire or something.
right,
Uh,
right. I think
it's making the immediate scene that the characters are in come to life better, so that the story resonates with the reader better.
absolutely. Actually, before you start, I actually wanted to jump in for like all the everybody listening, right? So that because we're gonna jump into setting, and James, like I said, he's got like a phenomenal understanding of it, right? And he's able to articulate obviously in words, but setting when we talk about within our course, right? We'll talk about how it's not only just strictly the physical world building, right? But like you talk about sensory inputs, its atmosphere, and a large part of what we talk about is sort of the emotional tone of the scene, right? Which is creating the setting. And one thing that I think is really important, just because as we go into it, is everybody like obviously we're talking about writing, and specifically we're going to talk about how it applies here. But like this is the Right Life podcast, and we talk about how uh, bring these things back to yourselves, right? So as we're always talking about this, think about sort of the foundations of story and how exactly these things not only affect the stories we tell people in our books or in our scripts or in our movies, but also like in the life and the way we're living, right? So how does the like living in sort of a dirty apartment, that's rat infested and the carpet's pulling off the walls while there's mildew, seeping through the windows, right? What does that kind of do to inform a child on what a healthy environment is, right? And what are the type of people who are living there? Are these people who are educated and moving forward, or like these are people stuck on hard times? Are these, sort of like, other side of the tracks type of people? Who are the characters that setting is developing, and what's the emotional resonance on the level of vibration carrying with that? And so these are all just some thoughts I want everybody to like kind of touch on lightly as we go throughout it. We're going to go into James's because we really want the writing to take place in this episode, but I really want to sort of put that out there that this is not only just good stuff to take notice in your writing, but also in your life. So take it away, James.
Hold up. If that was a personal example, you should really clean up the mildew. Rats and peeling walls and carpet and all that, those are fine. Did you clean up the mildew?
Yeah, no, for sure. That's not a personal example. I've been in places like this, yes, but no, I don't live there. I do live in sort of like a disrepaired house, but it's because like I'm thinking of buying it, and if you fix up a house before you buy it, that has a tendency to raise the price. So
No. Fix it up after you buy it.
exactamente, my guy. Shh. Hopefully, my landlord doesn't hear this. Actually, I'm.
All right.
No. All right.
So, hi, I'm James Krake, author of the Bastion Blackstone series. It's a cyberpunk detective story available on Amazon, and I will do my best to use it as an example, but also not ruin the story for you. It's the best example that I can personally use for what I'm about to talk about, and that's setting. The world is part of the setting, but that's a different talk altogether. I'm going to talk about the immediate scene, the stage for the characters to act on. Hopefully, by the end of this, you're going to come away with a better understanding of the theory of what you're trying to do when you describe the setting. Here's a hint: it's all about winning credibility and investment from your reader.
Now, when you say like credibility and investment, what are you kind of meaning like that?
Other people call it suspension of disbelief.
Oh,
When
right,
someone starts the story, based on the cover art and what they know about you and the back blurb, uh, they are willing to put up with so much in order to get a reward in the story, right?
Mm.
But if your book starts with like 50 pages of, I don't know, teen girls bickering about who's dating who and who should be dating who,
Right.
but you hooked them on magical girls, that's the kind of problem that you can run into.
Right. It's like starting out with like a psychological thriller and then talking about like sort of like sci-fi beats when it's like, hey, this is what I was promised.
Right, and keeping people moving through your story, like the way you do that is in the little things that most people will skim over.
Okay.
Which is why there are good books and bad books, I believe.
I feel yeah. So what are some of the choices you feel like you got to make when making setting?
Well, when making the setting or when setting a scene?
I'm sending you into the script. I'll edit this one out, but I'm just gonna ask you a question.
So, starting with the boring choices, unfortunately, I'm going to need to spend a few minutes on boring stuff you hopefully already know. Then we'll get to what you came for. You don't necessarily need to be good at scene setting to tell a good story, but it will definitely make it easier because there are tricks to how you do setting that changes the reader's perspective on the characters. To explain the steps in the process, I'm going to use the opening to Faceless as my example and walk you through the inciting incident.
Great book, Blackstone.
The first question is the most boring. What kind of scene is it? What's the function? If you can't answer this, you've got bigger problems, and I can help you here today. Because that's a plotting and character motivation problem.
Huh?
If the function of the scene seems to be independent of location, this can be tricky, however. For example, if the scene is two characters getting closer, that's driven by their chemistry, but there are settings that help, intimate settings. You can have them share food, for instance. Breaking bread is a custom as old as human civilization. But if the plot is more demanding, if the plot puts more constraints on the setting, you might have something like the detective discovering the corpse at the start of the mystery.
Oh yeah, it's just like in Faceless.
In Faceless, the corpse in question is unidentified, which is the premise of the story. A cyberpunk megacity where everything is tracked, monitored, surveilled, and recorded by computers. An unidentified corpse shouldn't be possible. If the government is going to completely invade your privacy, there had better be some upsides, right? I, as the author, could have killed John Doe in any way I wanted and in any place, given that the death wasn't seen by someone else. Not much of a mystery if there's a witness. Choosing where to put the corpse becomes a question of immersion. The John Doe needs a good reason to be there, which required me to ask questions about his daily life. Where did he live? Where did he work? What bar did he go to on his nights off?
So what's informing your decisions then? Like what's making you decide what makes you want to do what you want to do? Like when you did write it in Faceless, why did you do that?
Well, I ended up choosing his apartment because dying in your own home has a sense of violation to it.
Okay.
Your home is your safe place, but people die in their homes every day, so it's believable. The reader's suspension of disbelief is a currency you need to spend wisely. You do need to spend it, though. That disbelief is like investing your money back into a company. You take your profits at the end.
Okay, so you're thinking long game, right? So you're thinking long game when you're doing this.
Well, the long game ends at the back cover of your book.
Oh, okay. So then what do you get from it? Like, so where are you starting from there then when you're kind of going into all that?
Well, now I have the characters, a detective and a corpse, the plot intrigue, and the location. But I haven't actually done anything to describe the location, merely decided on what kind of location it is and why. Which brings me to the interesting stuff.
So this is, and the interesting stuff is like, obviously like things like tone, I guess, right? And just like how it feels. Because, all right. So then what makes you like, so I'm interested in then when you're picking all that, because you've got the apartment, the guy dying, right, in his apartment. Now you've set it up because you're obviously telling like a mystery, right? And so now you've had the elements of a mystery, but we know like with like a Slap on Titan versus Attack on Titan, you can have the same sort of scenes, but the tone is going to feel different. So what are some of the things like you do to like ground us in like, okay, this is, a mystery, but now it looks like a mystery. How do we make it feel like a mystery?
Well, that's the world's tone, right? Whenever you set a scene, you are making choices which will change the reader's mood and impression. The tone. Okay. Rain is sad, darkness is scary, sunshine is happy. An endless glow of neon advertisements across rusted steel and crumbling concrete as drug addicts tromp through puddles of grease has a flavor of soulless despair. Your genre and plot arc should have already clued you in on what tone you are targeting. Right. Generally speaking, you want the setting to match the character's mood because it gives consistent signals to the reader. It makes their emotions believable, which buys you credibility and benefit of the doubt.
What's the big thing you're shooting for when you're doing that, though?
Well, every single page, you need the reader wanting to read the next page. You need them caring about what happens to the characters next.
Right.
So when you're looking at the tone compared to the character's emotions and what's going on with the plot, you can draw a contrast, like singing in the rain. But that requires your attention to pull off. That's not something you can write on autopilot and slap down your favorite stock lines of description.
That makes sense. So, like, how'd you do it in Faceless?
Well, Bastion, the city the story takes place in, is a dump. That's part of the cyberpunk genre.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Fantastical technology contrasted by lowly human grime. I write cyberpunk because it is astonishingly close to modern day conditions. Just a bit more densely populated, and the tech is a bit better. Mm-hmm. People resonate with living in a dump while watching the lives of billionaires from the glow of their overpriced smartphones.
Yeah, right.
So my stories take place in a sprawling tech ghetto, but whether that's a scary feeling or a sad one is still within my control.
So what are some of the things like you do within like your control then? Like, because I guess you're manipulating it, but how do you keep it sounding and feeling natural so that like people are having natural emotions without it feeling contrived?
Well, even within a setting, there's different settings within the larger setting, right? I could be telling a story about the other side. The corporate elites living atop the skyscrapers with personal servants and grilling real meat, not that lab-grown stuff for the peasants.
Right, okay.
But I think right there, with those two sentences, I've already made you dislike the guy who lives there. That's because he has it better than the reader has it, and worse, he's rude about it.
Right. So you're using characters, like you're using like the situations of one character to another to sort of create the setting, and sort of create
Oh,
that sort of power
absolutely.
dynamic. Oh,
There is no setting without character.
right. Right. Yeah, they're interrelated. Obviously, that makes total. Yeah, of course, that makes total sense, right? So, but you need to have like really developed characters as well, right? So you need to have
Well,
people
this
like
is also a way to develop the characters.
right. Oh, yeah, of course. So, like, how do you do that? I'm interested. Talk to me about
So,
that.
as it pertains to setting, always remember that the characters are implicitly interacting with the setting.
Right.
Does the detective walk through puddles without a thought because he's watching the people around him, or does he avoid the puddles to keep his boots dry so his wife doesn't yell at him for tracking crime into the kitchen again?
Right.
Both of
Right.
those are valid character actions and tell the reader about the puddles. So when you see a billionaire knocking the ash off an imported real tobacco cigarette and letting it fall down to the street below, where a one-armed busker is playing his heart out on steel drums to get a meal, you are using the setting to highlight character action, which forms opinions in the reader's mind.
Right. Okay. So, what are some of the things you're trying to form in the reader's minds? What are some of those opinions?
Sympathy, mostly. You
Right.
really need to control who the reader sympathizes with.
Uh-huh.
The reader is far more likely to sympathize with the poor schmuck at the bottom, living in an apartment where if you reach your arms out, you can touch both walls, your bed and your toilet all at the same time, where it stinks
Mhm.
like rancid milk no matter how much you scrub the fridge out, and the computer desk is a dump site of empty cans that even mold doesn't want to bother with.
Right.
Both of
Okay.
those describe someone's home, but the
Right.
difference
Right.
is the trick of setting. Hollywood will brazenly tell screenwriters the neurological tricks that go into a script, and one of them is to put the protagonist in pain. You want
Right.
the audience to like someone, make them suffer. The ancient Greeks will go further to say that it must be a good, virtuous person who is suffering, because who will care if a thief gets his comeuppance?
Right.
However, character isn't today's subject, and it doesn't even apply to a corpse beyond the evidence of how clean he left his house. The
Right.
trick
But
is
this is just they inform each other, but yeah, they are different foundations still. So like how do you what's the trick of like putting it together, I guess, like creating that sympathy and holding it all at the same time building? Like I'm interested in how you build that.
if the character is the sympathetic character, make the setting the worst version of that setting you can. If it's the antagonist, it makes sense to do so. Give them the best version of that setting. The hero is sleeping under a tree in a rainstorm. The demon lord has a castle gilded in gold.
That makes a lot of sense, man. That makes a lot of sense. Because I feel like we as people, we inherently we assign value to certain things, right? Especially like with Hollywood and movies, we've had so much exposure to different um elements, I suppose, right? Of
Oh yeah,
what is a setting and like inherent richness or whatever. So we have like that inherent emotional resonance with certain things. So when and everybody loves the underdog, right?
for sure.
So right, so everybody loves the underdog. So that just makes so much sense, right? When you're building that. So like specifically, so when you're talking about building these elements, now I'm interested in because like obviously someone like say who's like born in rural Africa or like makes $2 a day versus like someone who lives in like the United States, like that contrast might be even different, right? Because like you could be like in Alabama, a trailer home, and like in comparison, when you look up, you feel poor. But then when you look at the people like in Africa, you're like, oh, I'm pretty rich. So I'm kind of interested in like in containing it within the story. Like, how do you sort of like engage people to like see it how it ought to be in the relation? Like, I know you have the different characters, but like, especially if like different people are coming from different backgrounds, right? Like, some people might need like hear sympathetic characters versions like a story and be like, man, that ain't shit compared to like what I've gone through in my life. Like how do you sort of like I guess engage and like build the believability for people to like do you know what I mean? Like if I have like a worse life than the protagonist, how am I supposed to feel sorry for the protagonist?
Oh well, there are some people out there that have had very bad lives, and you can't really go worse than that.
Right.
Um, but
Sometimes it's just this.
that should make them all the more sympathetic to other people who are virtuous and in pain.
Right. Right. So
Uh,
how do you I guess engage that with like how do you engage it just for the reader's sake, like get the suspense of disbelief, right? Because like
sure.
even though like I'm not like a fighter pilot, I still feel for Maverick and Top Gun Maverick. So like, and you manage to do it well. Like, there are times like I especially like we won't talk the sequel to Faceless, which is bomb. I'll say It hasn't come out. We won't skip too far ahead. But like, so let's say in Faceless, you have some really really cool characters. How do you like engage us and like get us fully like into a scene so that we buy the character's feelings, even though lose ourselves? How do we lose ourselves in that? That's what I'm interested
Sure.
in.
So once you already have the function, aesthetic, and direction to the scene,
Mm-hmm.
that's when you get into the nitty gritty of how you draw in the reader and get them to pay you more suspension of disbelief. To
Okay.
put it so simply, it sounds like a checklist. You need to engage as many of the senses as you can.
Mm-hmm.
Sensory input is how the human mind interfaces with the world, and I'll get to that in a moment. First, I want to explain why you want to grab the reader by each of the senses.
Okay.
We take in data and build a model of the world so that we can think about it. If you don't give the reader enough data to make that model, then they aren't thinking about the story.
Okay.
When a detective walks into an apartment with a corpse on the floor, the reader wants to anticipate what's coming next. That's true of all stories, on the big scale and the small scale. That's why they turn the page.
Mm-hmm.
While you can certainly surprise the reader, and indeed you should, rewarding them for paying attention is always a safe bet. When you throw a twist at them, that's you spending that suspension of disbelief you burned.
Mm-hmm.
But doing what they can see coming isn't being predictable, it's having a flow.
A flow.
Uh, yeah. To jump
So
to another example, say you have a protagonist who's winning too much at cards. You know you need him you need him face down and bloody in the back alley so the female lead can call an ambulance for him and thus they meet. To make the
mhm.
reader anticipate that, they need to know that it's that kind of place. He
All
was
right.
hustling a biker bar. He was rubbing the coke dealer wrong, something that
Mhm.
has a threat inherent to it. There are setting details and character reactions, of course, that build the anticipation as the scene goes, and your goal is to make the reader think he's going to get his skull cracked right before the security thug puts his hand on the guy's shoulder and has him step outside.
So it's like you're setting you it's like you're setting it up you're setting it up based off all the things that are going, like all these like sort of miniature Chekhov's guns, right?
Yeah,
Hmm.
um, because theoretically you could be engaging any sense. So you also need to realize that the details you're doing, like what things look like, how people are acting, need to be building to something.
Right. So you're meticulous about every single element within the scene being like, is it going to lead to this conclusion? So like with even within the senses, what they pick up, it's like, is these things that are going to help lead me to this conclusion, or at least help that overall arc in terms of tone or like feelings or something like that?
I certainly try to.
Right. Okay.
To jump
Um,
to another example, sorry, whoops. You probably
mhm.
imagined that scene with the cards from a movie. It's
Right,
not a
right, right,
terribly unique scene. What's more, I'm willing to bet that the gambler in question was rather shabbily dressed within your mind. By
right.
contrast, the security thug might well have been in a suit, maybe with a fat gold ring on his pinky finger. These visual cues have been repeated so many times in film and fiction because the sympathetic character has it worse than expected and the antagonistic character has it better.
Right. Right. I feel like, is there a good example you can think of like that? Like, because that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, there's so many movies like that. Like,
Yeah. Well, if
um,
you were on the internet last year, you probably heard of Squid Game, which
right, right,
starts with a gambler losing money on horse races, then getting approached by a suave man in a suit.
right,
These are
right.
these characters you're supposed to like just from the way they're dressed. The only shortcoming of that scene is insufficient virtue in Ki Hun, the protagonist. But again, that's another subject I'll have to cover in the future.
Okay, no worries. Well, I like what you said though, like the idea, because the man, he comes all dressed up. He's super handsome. He's on top of his game. And then Gihan, just got bloodied up, was running from these dudes. So there is sort of like that power dynamic that's present between the
Yep.
characters. And that does, you're right, that totally does set the setting. And emotionally, I think we feel for Gihan, but also it engages our sentence, like it's engaging us aesthetically. You instantly see the power dynamic. Like just if you got a still of that picture, right, where Gihan is like, even when he's getting the money, like I'll never forget when that guy drops the money on the ground. So that makes sense. Like little things like that, like characters sort of informing the power dynamics, right? So
Yeah.
then what are you, so in terms of engaging the reader, so that's like a visual way, but so how some of the other ways like you get us with the senses, I'm interested, especially in a book, right? Because it's not as easy like a movie.
Uh, Books have to do a bit more work to bring an image or a particular thing to mind because, like, I don't know, Godzilla's roar. works great in film. It's
Mm.
pretty hard to do in the written word because that Godzilla's roar is
Super unique.
unearthly on purpose. It's hard to
Yeah.
imagine without hearing it, right?
Right. Right.
Um,
Okay. So like when you're
but that,
going,
well, that
so
comes
how do
back
you think?
to can the reader construct the world in their head? And while a story should engage the reader intellectually and make
All
them
right.
consider abstract opinions of characters, such as this couple is so cute together, I want to see them happy, or my God, this guy is walking human trash. When is he going to get his just desserts?
Mm.
That is something to reach for. The sensory inputs and the actions and plots are the foundation to achieve that. The five senses that you're working with are sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell.
Mm.
That's also a lie, though. Humans have a lot more senses than that. Kinesthetics,
Right.
time, and pain are the most useful and should not be overlooked. We,
Kinesthetics, time, and pain. That's so
yeah, you know
right.
where your body is. You know what it feels like to be moved. You know the feeling of time passing quickly or slowly, and
Right.
pain is different from touch.
Right. 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 Can you
When
give us
you
some good
jump out of a
examples?
plane and
Okay.
parachute into a battlefield, you feel the loss of gravity in your gut. When a
Uh,
mugger throws a character against a wall and jams a knife against their throat, the victim is going to feel the throw, then the rough brick ripping their skin up, then the cold line of steel, and then they'll notice the bloodshot sclera of their aggressor. Maybe they'll smell the 3 shots of bourbon on their breath to work up the courage. And when the fear kicks in, every heartbeat making the skin of their throat pulse against the deadly razor, they're suddenly feeling seconds pass like minutes.
right. That makes a lot of sense. That makes so much sense, right? Because I mean, it makes sense. Now I'm being like literal and stuff like that. No, but that's really good, man, because you're building everything in that scene, and it really sort of like gets that feeling into the gut, right? So like that's interesting. So how do you apply it? I'm interested. Like how do you pick out those details? Because like I feel like it's so easy to just write guy holds neck to throat, but even if there's a scene I'm thinking of where I'm like, man, I could have done a way better job. Like, what sort of helps you engage or think at that level? I'm interested, like picking out those details.
Well, part of it is a intuitive understanding of how fast you want the scene to move, and
Hmm.
describing things will slow the pacing. So
Right,
once you have a sense for pacing, you can go, this is where I'm supposed to be describing things. And then once the
right,
character understands that, the world that they're in, I can then use them very quickly without much description.
right,
Uh,
right,
and you just have to know what you're doing when you're choosing if you decide you have 5 sentences, you need to know what those 5 sentences are going to allude to in the reader's mind.
right,
To return to Faceless and the Mystery Corpse, the first
right.
anticipation is of a body. The body must be embodied to the reader. I say embodied because you have to do more than visually show it. Make
Uh-huh.
the reader hear the buzzing of flies contrasted to the grinding of an unbalanced computer fan. Make them
Ugh.
smell the rotting filth as well as the burnt dust of an overworked, unclean graphics processor. Make them feel the carpet squish underfoot, saturated with oozing bile, and then make them feel the board stiff folding chair that John Doe used to sit at his computer to do his work because that's where the clue is. And you've been trickling them this image the whole time. You, the author, know where the clue is that the detective needs to solve the mystery. So make the reader anticipate the detective doing that. But don't take so long the reader begins to question how the characters haven't noticed themselves.
So you have to almost like recognize that the characters and the readers are like together in it, but at the same time they're still separate, but like they're together. So you really want to, I guess that's the embodiment, right? You want your audience to embody the character.
I want the audience to be able to see like 3 sentences ahead.
Right. So almost like they're like over the shoulder, like the over the shoulder cam. Like you're playing as the character, but you can see just a little bit more than the character can.
Right. If they can see too far, like the character probably isn't proactive enough, or you're going too slow. And if they can't see it all, the reader's confused.
All right. Can you give me another example of that?
To try and prove the point more, I'll go through another example, but drawn out with all the guts of the sausage on display.
Okay, hit me.
The room is not pleasant. It has a cold draft. The chair is not comfortable. The cushion has been obliterated by 1,000 asses before you. The air does not smell good. It smells of artificial bubblegum mixed with Lysol. There isn't good music playing. There's a gurgling fish tank and Christmas music 3 months early. The fish tank isn't even pleasant to look at because it hasn't been cleaned in ages. There's algae fogging the glass. The fish are lethargic and mundane. But the gurgling is better than the random flipping of pages that keep rustling next to you. A 5-year-old tabloid is open across the side table, getting blasted by the ventilation. It flips from a page on some celebrity's crack addiction to a page on Disney buying up another of your childhood memories to wear like a skin suit. Then the grinding wheel starts up, that ear-splitting screech. You can hear the jerk of the victim, the way they shake their chair. It's just like your own involuntary twitch as the pneumatic torture device comes to life. Then the door opens. It doesn't fit the frame well, and they have to thump it free with their foot so a worn-out woman in her 40s can call your name. It's your turn to get a root canal, and you wonder if just letting it rot would be more pleasant.
Oh man.
If that passage worked for you, you've
Right.
probably been to a dentist a bit like that. They seem to exist all over the world in that quasi-professional state of cigarette-stained stasis. Evoking the reader's own memories is the real cheat code to writing, but that's easier said than done.
But what's cool is like, so you did something really interesting there, James. So because I had no idea really what you were talking about, right? Like we had gone in, right? You like, okay, because you had me engaged. So it was almost like there was a mystery, like I was unwrapping a gift, but then you hit it with like the root canal, and I was like, oh shit, it's a dentist's office, and it made all made sense. So it was like there's this weird where you were evoking sort of memories and feelings with me, but it didn't come together in the end. Like I don't know, like how did you? Yeah, like okay, that's really interesting because even like just kind of talking about that off the riff, like you're bringing these elements in, but it's almost like you didn't just say, okay, we're at a dentist's office and then blah, 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 blah. You built it up and then you dropped it at the end and I understood. And so there's this sense of like payoff, like what's going on there, right?
So something to note, though, is you put it all together for sure at the very end.
Mm-hmm.
I've had other people read that passage and they catch it at bubblegum and Lysol.
Wow.
It's like sentence 3. They're like, oh, he's describing a dentist office because the specific image there and that smell hits some people so strongly.
Right. So different senses, like you're going to catch people from different ways, right?
Right.
Right. Oh, frick. So you're using because certain people are going to be more kinesthetic or maybe more pain based or more sight based. So then like and then you have that payoff, I felt like. And it's fun because I feel like until you confirm the root canal, it doesn't really, but I feel like yeah, some people will catch it early on. So like how did you do that just now? I'm interested. How did you just do that?
Well, that's the goal of the descriptions is anticipation and payoff. On the larger scale of story and anticipation, you do eventually need to put the sympathetic character in a better than expected situation to reveal that part of them. How many times can I say the food in Bastion is crap? That it's synthetic goo dressed up to resemble the real stuff, and everyone is in tacit agreement to pretend it's palatable. I can say that a heck of a lot of times, the majority of the time even. But at some point, I need to give my protagonist a taste of the good stuff. I need to flip the dynamic and show how he stops when he's surprised, how he craves it, how it brightens his day to get a spicy plate of bolognese served to him by a girl with a smile, happy to see him.
You need that contrast, right? Like
right.
Because if it's always just the same thing, like even me, I can have my favorite meal, but if I eat it again and again and again, it's not going to be my favorite meal anymore, right? So like, so like you're bringing it out, like obviously I have my taste senses for like, how do you, I guess, bring out those different contrasts? Because how's this person who's eat the same crap versus loving it? Like, how do you build that contrast for the person? Like,
it's about bringing it to life for the reader. The taste, the steam rising off of it, the way the sauce splatters off because he's twirling his fork too quick, and the way he dusts on some extra Parmesan. And then you have stakes. Right. You have something to interrupt with a rude call from work. You have a place to bring his wife on a date.
Okay, so
right.
So when you're having steaks, obviously you're not talking about beef steaks. You're talking about like steaks, like rising the story and moving the plot forward. So what do you mean, like when you say that? Like you have a place to bring his wife on a date.
So that comes back into character motivation and plot progression.
Hmm.
The description of the setting justifies to the reader that, oh wow, that pasta is really good. That really is shockingly different from the algae paste noodles he had on the first floor of the megacity.
Yeah,
And
and you
then
do
you
it.
understand why he cares about that place, and the reader will care about things the character cares about.
Right. And you do it not by saying, well, he really liked the food, but you're talking about like the taste, the steam rising off, like when his senses are being impacted and
Right.
they're engaged. That's how you show the attachment.
And you can have the character say, holy crap, this is amazing.
Uh,
But generally, I would say that you put that declaration after describing the pasta, because you want the reader to go, that sounds like really good food compared to the other things I've seen. I've seen this guy eating mutant lobster fried in oil that they called butter.
mhm. That makes sense. All right. I love it. I
And
love it.
that's the payoff, because you describe good food and the reader goes, he must be liking this, and then you
Mhm.
have the character say, this is insanely good, I need more, and that's the
Yeah.
payoff to the anticipation.
Right. Right. So,
To construct a more overt example,
uh-huh.
consider a man who has been traveling. But
Hmm.
he's the sympathetic character, so he's not just riding a cart through the forest. He's been trudging through a deluge that's filled his boots with mud, and he forgot to top off his wineskin, but he has to go on because he's the king's courier, and he must deliver his letter to the war front. When the sun is going down and he finds an inn with an open room, he might go in expecting the worst: sediment in his ale, mold in the hay mattress, and so on. Instead, he finds a piping hot bath. He gets to strip off and slip into the watery embrace and feel the day's troubles melt away. He finally has something nice, which makes it all the worse when a thief steals that letter while he's bathing.
Ah, fudge.
It's the setting which drives the character action here. If the courier was on a cart and the day pleasant, and the cart driver weighs him off with a recommendation to have the inn's apple pie, then the letter is stolen because he stayed too long in the bath, the courier would seem idiotic and incompetent rather than sympathetic.
Right. So you have to change the circumstances to sort of change the way we view the characters.
Yeah, perhaps you do want the courier to be an idiot. That could be a
Right.
fine premise to a story, but you
Right.
need to know what impression you're creating in the reader.
Right. That makes so much sense. Right. That makes so much sense. Yeah.
To return to the idea of building a model in the reader's mind, keeping the scene moving is good practice for plotting and pacing. It keeps up an impression that things are progressing, even if they're really not. I find
Mm.
this most troublesome when the point of the scene is two characters talking something out or failing to do so.
Yeah, I see that a lot. Like just where you'll have kind of like these characters like talking heads in a room, and they're just kind of going back and forth. But it's not really moving the plot forward. It's just kind of like a random scene. Maybe it's like info dumpy. Um, I don't know. Like, so how do you work through that? I guess like in terms of building up, making it feel more dynamic.
Well, a recent example I workshopped for a fellow writer essentially involved the cast of characters having breakfast and sharing information about the night before to puzzle out a mystery.
Right.
The entire scene could have been told with, the next morning they all sat down in the cafeteria together and Kai asked about the mystery. If the reader already knows the cafeteria, this can be fine, if the characters are strong enough to let their dialogue carry the scene.
Right.
Alternatively, the scene starts with them walking in from the blazing sun and getting a gust of air conditioning. The girls sigh, fanning their sweat off, and one even unbuttons the top of her shirt. The guys stumble into the back of the line because they're sneaking a peek, so one of them starts the discussion to cover what they had been staring at. Then, as they're talking, they each heap some food onto their trays, but not just generic food. The musclehead gets a stack of pancakes and syrup. The ditz opts for yogurt and honeydew, and so on. They carry the discussion over to a table with the trays of food. But the love interest stops the musclehead because they overlook the whipped cream for the pancakes, and everybody likes whipped cream on pancakes. Finally, they take their seats on the cheapest plastic chairs the company could buy and get to the big revelation of the plot, only to be pulled away before they can finish eating.
Oh, okay. First up, is this Brandy's scene?
Uh, Hopefully, she doesn't mind.
I don't think so. No, I think she'll be happy. No, I was like, I, I said her name, but like, yeah, I know this scene from this character. You did a good description of it because yeah, that's totally what it was. I feel like
So
she took one out. That makes
yeah,
sense.
by moving the scene around within the same room, you are demonstrating the logic of the scene,
Hmm.
even if it's as basic as a cafeteria. You're
Right.
reinforcing the mental world you're creating with the story. You're also changing what the characters can interact with to reveal their inner character.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. There's a lot of characterization in that point, right? I feel like just getting characters and using setting to build up characters is like really important. I feel like obviously like there's certain points in the story where that becomes more important than others. Like I don't know. What's an example of like when it's really important to like do something like that with setting, but like there's a lot going on, but it's really important to get the characters in. Can you think of any examples?
Yeah, this can be incredibly important in fight sequences,
Oh,
particularly when magic and monsters and aliens get involved. Just like how
oh,
a reader needs to know what spells the wizard can cast to understand the stakes and the danger, the reader needs to know where the combatants are, where the obstacles and environmental hazards are, and so on. If two people are grappling atop a cliff, you've created anticipation that they might roll off the side and fall. If the protagonist is going to save himself by grabbing an exposed root, you had better have already told the reader that there even are trees, that it's a dirt cliff, not a granite slab, and so on.
makes
What's even
sense.
better is if you can trick the reader into thinking your description already served its purpose. Say, if the assailant was hiding behind a tree, you've told the reader there are trees and painted that into their mind. When they roll across the dirt and your protagonist gets a mouthful of dirt and moss, that's them getting hurt in the fight. And then when they fall and they grab an exposed root, all the clues were already there. The reader can be surprised by it and yet feel they should have seen that coming. And not just because it's a big cliche, but that's beside the point.
It's like it's because you put the elements in there by them interacting with them, so it's coming as a flow and as a part of the action. But it's like you're setting up those elements to be used later in different ways, and so it's almost like you're going in to like kind of have it come in. So I think it's important to like put these elements in and I can make sense in sort of the mechanics of the story. How do you do it without making it like sound bad though? Because I think sometimes like it can be like, oh, like he hid, but like because you did it there, a good example of like, oh, he hid the behind the tree, then later grab the roots or something like that. Like it's being used twice in different ways so they can see it coming. But sometimes some people will be like, oh, there's a tree there. Like it just doesn't sound super great. I think especially in because I think visually it's a lot easier to do um, but in terms of prose, to really build that scene, or like, I don't know, how do you write it in such a way where it feels natural and it's elegant to read versus like, sort of this contrived mechanical feeling?
Well, that's unfortunately the hardest part.
All
I've
right.
covered everything except the finer details of prose.
All right.
And I don't think that can even really be taught. Prose is the art of writing, and the only way to get better at it is to read good prose in your own subjective opinion, and then strive to do it as well as you can.
All right.
There is something important to consider when doing descriptions, which I can struggle with at times:
All right.
ambiguity.
Okay.
I can't take credit for this example, but consider the cold open. The guards chased her through the garden. This
Okay.
could be knights running down a tomboy princess in her own courtyard. It could also be the presidential secret service chasing an intruder through the rose garden. Without pre knowledge for context, a reader doesn't know which to picture for those words. When opening a story, picking details to focus on that are as illuminating as possible is very important.
Helps us ground us in the story, right? Like, do you think that changes from genre to genre?
Uh, there's an extra thing to consider, at least for science fiction,
All
because you
right.
need to clue in the reader about technological assumptions. You know,
All right.
teleportation, neural implants, faster than light travel. Are they on space? Are there aliens?
Right.
The reader will accept any answer you give them, but they do want to know what the answers are.
And you need to ground those details first. That makes so much effing sense. It's funny because even as I'm thinking about some of the prologues and the things I'm done, right? There's so many things that I've seen where I'm like, man, I did not hit those details right. And like for you, like I can go in and even without you saying it, I can already see because I guess you're grabbing things that are coming from other tropes or whatever, but it's like I can see the clothing, I can see the materials, I can see like the bricks. And there's sometimes when I'm like, man, like what is it? I'm not doing it. And I guess it's because I'm not picking those right like examples. So that makes a lot of sense. Even like I don't know. I'm just trying to think of like ways to apply it more, just because like the Girl and the Beast is a western, and so for me like one of the first descriptions I'll talk about is like sort of the dust and the heat of the desert, but it's always like the same type of thing. And I'm trying to think of like what are other examples I can do in different situations that can kind of pull it together. This is all pretty cool. So I'm interested how do you tie all this together, right? Because we've talked about a lot of different things. We've talked about like sort of the pros, engaging senses, all this. So can you give us an example sort of like of how you put all this together and really drive it home? Because I'm interested because I'm just struggling to see how to put this together. Like it makes sense, all these individual elements, but like how do they tie together for you? I guess is
Well,
what I'm
I
interested
do have one final example prepared for this.
in.
Um, Maybe not a perfect opening, but I constructed it to go beat through beat based on this essay, right?
Okay.
The bottom of a bottle of rum burned in my gut as I shuffle danced across the gravel roof of my apartment building. I had Linkin Park on blast through my phone like it was 2003 again instead of 2019. I couldn't afford to go out to the bars where bodies pressed together in a glide of alcohol and sweat that brought everyone together. I was too unemployed for that, and for my apartment for that matter. Behind on rent 2 months. But I hefted up to the neck of my liquor bottle and gave a toast to the Rockies, to the twinkling lights of a tech boom town that had fucked me over. At least the rum's not gone. Then the downtown Royal Spring exploded. Seared my eyes like nuclear fire, and the sound hit me like a hammer next. The skull felt like a gong. I didn't even realize the shockwave hit me until I was falling. Arms and legs useless until I slammed into the gravel, ripped my jacket up like sandpaper, and my ears were still ringing when I realized debris was peppering the city like hail. Blinking the blue smear from my eyes and still unable to tell the ringing in my ears apart from my music, I groaned, one hand after the next, and pushed myself up. Accidentally fell over and then actually figured out which way was up despite my reeling inner ears. Eventually, I saw what had happened to Royal Spring. It hadn't been bombed. Well, by the damage, it looked like it had, but no, something had landed. As the dust cleared, it stood above the city, black against the night, not a single light. I could only make it out by the silhouette of jagged steel and adorning structures. Taller than the corporate buildings that had kicked me out, this thing now loomed into the night like an arm reaching to grasp the heavens. Or like the broken neck of my rum bottle. Well,
Right.
fuck me, I said, and hopped over the edge of the building, not to kill myself on the landscaping boulders 4 stories below. No, my landlord wasn't getting off that easy. But onto my apartment balcony. Then in I went to the dark cave I inhabited. The only light was the screensaver for my television until I popped open my fridge to grab a roadie. Got one measly can of lager, then I was out the door. Before my neighbors could stick their heads out, I ran down the steps and out to the street. The responsible half the population were still waking up. I could see them turn on lights and open windows. They lit the street like mosaic walls into a canyon as I jogged straight at the tower.
Wow. Okay, so that's a guy just chilling, and this thing just comes out of nowhere, slams down, blows everything away. You told us a lot. You told us he was broke, right? You told us the city's like not in the greatest time. You hit us at the time period. There's a lot going on there.
Yep, well, that might be a bit fast. But everyone has a different opinion on when the inciting incident should occur, and that applies to readers as well as writers. Not
Right.
everyone has the patience to sit around for a few chapters getting to know the characters. It also depends on why they picked up the book. For a premise like Alien Invasion, I'm under expectations to get to that part pretty damn quickly.
Right.
I
Right.
do, however, still start with character. I key in his actions, his inebriation, some of his personal taste in music, a dash
Right.
of humor, which might or might not have landed for you, and then I hit with the alien arrival. Of course, I don't state that's what it is. I say
Right.
downtown exploded, then I pull it back to the character as the waves hit him. Sight, sound, feeling, pain, damage, confusion, aftermath. Then I show the tower. And even then, I show it in negative. I end the description with a bit of awe and a callback to the rum.
Right.
Next is a movement. I've already said he's on his apartment building, and there's nothing very interesting about a tar paper and gravel roof. Every delinquent and then some knows what those are like. I jump him
Mhm.
down, take him through his apartment and then the building and out in one flowing sweep. None of that matters except to connect the start to the goal. The reader wants to know about the tower. That's the only mystery right now. That's where the anticipation is. But they'd feel cheated if I cut straight to his arrival. Everything about the fridge and the larder and the neighbors is just to maintain the immersion of the scene.
Right.
Yeah, I stopped the example there because entering the tower almost resets the work of describing the setting. It
Right.
transitions from the known to the understandable and then to the strange, which is why I think the chapter works well as an opening to a book. It would,
Right.
however, be stepping on the toes of other subject matter and not contributing much to the discussion of setting. In this case, a modern city at night is viewed by a drunk loser.
Right. Well, dude, I thought it was a good opening. Like it's an interesting thing, right? Because um and you said you wrote this. This is one of your earlier works, right?
That was a rewrite of one of my earlier works, yeah.
Okay. Because like I think you did a good job sort of bringing in all the elements, like kind of what you talked about with the senses, right? And like I think especially obviously there's the anticipation and the payoff because he's just kind of chilling there and you get to the point quickly. So it does feel like there's a little bit of a pacing, but I definitely see the scene. I think that's the biggest thing. Like I think one of the biggest ways I can say like really sticks out with like why I'd say like you're a good setting master is I feel like you're really good at picking up like the cues. Like I always, every time I read one of your books, I can always see the scene. It's never like this thing floating around. And when it's not, when I can't, it's very obvious and apparent because you oftentimes do it such a good job. So, um, yeah. Okay, dude. Well, snap. That's really cool. I love that example and you just telling us about setting. That was really cool, man. You've uh you've done a really good job like kind of building that up. Did you always just have like a knack for it or like how did you come like I don't know, like how did you come better to figure all that out, right? Because you said a lot of people just notice you're good at setting, but you just you're good at
Personally, I think it's
how.
because I read a lot of manga and comics, so I'm
Mhm.
used to absorbing stories visually, and
Mm,
it kind of built it into my brain that these are important things to focus on, and I happen to find them easier to perfect than you know making the reader fall in love with a character, right?
right. Wow. Um, so so what are some of the things you say like are guys ways to improve and I don't know, any final thoughts?
Practice, practice, practice.
Mhm.
If anyone has listened to this the whole way through, it still comes down to practice, practice, practice. Now,
Right.
in conclusion to this, if you crack
Mhm.
open your favorite book, you'll probably find that they wrote better than I did. But I'll wager my reputation that they're doing the things I talk about because there's a damn good reason to do so.
Right.
Unfortunately, the scope of this essay, this talk, has prohibited me from delving too deep on character, perspective, overall pacing, and a thousand other things that go into making a good story.
Yeah, we talk forever, right?
Yeah,
We should just have you on the show more, right? As we build up the audience, so it'll be sweet. All
yeah.
right.
No,
So,
I'll have to make similar essays in the future and touch on different subjects.
dude, I love it, man. This is a great this was really good, right? Because you really brought out some elements of setting that like I just think like it's funny because you really see it from a different angle, right? Because like me, I really get into like the emotional tone. Like obviously that's one of the things like I teach as sort of a core tenant. And I talk a lot about the elements that you brought up. So you talked about tame, kinesthetic. Like I talk about sort of building that within emotion and real talk. I feel like I more teach around it, if that makes sense. Right. Like I teach around sort of the effects of that and have people sort of consider the greater implications and story. But like you really know how to boil it down um, to really building it out. And I love that sort of exactitude in your thinking. Um, this is super great, man. So we're kind of getting up here on the hour, but like anybody watch this, and there's also more people gonna like check it out. Like, how can they find you and get more exposure to you? Because you've been so grateful. Like, you've been so great. I think people should. How will they get a hold of you?
The easiest way will be my website, jameskrake.com. I've got novels like Faceless and soon Ship of Fools available on
Mhm.
Amazon and other major retailers. I've
Right.
also got my web novel, The Undying Emperor or How to Lie Like a Military Bulletin, available for free on Royal Road. And I encourage you to join my mailing list to stay up to date on what I'm up to. I hope this has
Really.
helped. If I'm full of shit, I want to see refutations in the comments.
Absolutely. No, dude, we'll tell you. No, you're not full of shit. Yeah, shit. But this was great. I'm definitely excited to see what people think of this because this was really helpful, actually. It really helped me get some powerful insights on like how to improve it. I'm going to be mentioning it in my week 3 update for Operation Goose Rocket. So I think this has just been great for great storytelling, and it's really helped me kind of get a better understanding of how I can even build some settings, right? Because I think, especially like in The Girl and the Beast, the setting is like a pretty core thing because it's a Western, right? And I think fundamentally it is a Western, but it takes place sort of like in the sort of like dystopian future or whatever. And sometimes like there's elements of that I feel like I get right, but I don't necessarily feel like it's on the level that you do. So there's some things you even said that I'm really committed to like focusing on to build a better experience for my audience. So I love it, man. I love it. I'm thankful and I'm grateful.
All right.
Yeah, dude. Absolutely. Well, guys, we are getting up on the hour. We're so glad that anyone who would join and watched us enjoyed it. This is the Right Life Podcast, episode 2 on setting and clarity with James Krake. As you guys know, and as he said, you can catch him on his website, buy Faceless on Amazon, and look forward to Ship of Fools and Undying Emperor on Rural Road. Guys, this has been so good. I'm glad to have you, James. Glad to have everybody here. And yeah, you've just been great. And this has been fantastic on setting. We'll cut it up, but everybody stay happy, stay healthy, and have a nice day. Thanks for joining us, James.